Here is something the mulch delivery guy and your garden center would genuinely prefer you never figure out. There is a reason the mulch section at every big box home improvement store is positioned right at the entrance, right where you have to walk past it on the way in and on the way out. It is not convenience. It is because mulch is a subscription product. You buy it in spring, it breaks down, it washes away, it fades, and by next spring, the weeds are back, the bare soil is showing through, and you are loading bags into your cart again. That is the cycle they are counting on. What they are not going to tell you is that there is an entirely different approach, one where you put something in the ground one time, and that thing handles the weeds for you automatically, year after year, without being replenished, without washing away, and without costing you a single dollar after the initial planting. I have been doing this professionally for close to 30 years. I have installed ground covers across every kind of climate and soil condition this country has to offer. And the difference between a yard that requires you every weekend and a yard that manages itself almost entirely comes down to plant selection. That is it. Today I am going to walk you through 11 ground covers that do not just look good but actively, mechanically, and in some cases biochemically, prevent weeds from gaining any foothold in your beds. I need you to stay with me because number 8 on this list is the specific answer for that problem. Strip along your fence line where nothing ever seems to establish properly. And number 5 is going to change how you think about that bare baked patch next to your front walkway permanently. Before anything else, drop your state or your USDA hardiness zone in the comments right now. I need to know where you are gardening. Your climate is the single biggest variable in every plant recommendation I make. And when you drop that zone, you help me make better content for your specific conditions and for every other gardener watching from your region. Let us get into it. Number 1, woolly thyme, Thymus pseudolanuginosus. I want to open with this one specifically because most gardeners have heard of creeping thyme, but have no idea that this close relative exists and outperforms it in certain critical conditions. Woolly thyme is a mat-forming, low-growing perennial that tops out at about 1 inch to 1.5 inches tall. That is not a typo. It grows lower and tighter than almost any other ground cover on this list, and that density is the entire point. When you have a plant that sits that close to the soil surface, covers that completely, and interlocks its foliage so tightly that it forms an essentially continuous carpet, what you have eliminated is the concept of available germination space. Weed seeds need bare soil. They need contact with soil particles and access to moisture and light. Woolly thyme denies all three simultaneously. The mat it forms is so tight that weed seeds that blow in simply sit on top of the foliage and never reach the soil. There is no germination. There is no establishment. There is nothing. And like its cousin creeping thyme, woolly thyme also releases aromatic allelopathic compounds from its foliage and roots. These are volatile oils that function as natural pre-emergents, chemically discouraging competing seeds from germinating in the surrounding soil. You are getting two independent weed suppression mechanisms from one plant that you buy once and never have to replace. The foliage is soft, fuzzy, and silver green, which is genuinely attractive as a texture contrast in sunny beds and between stepping stones. It produces light pink flowers in midsummer that bees cover completely when in bloom. It tolerates foot traffic better than most people expect from something this low-growing, which makes it genuinely practical between pavers on a garden path. Woolly thyme thrives in full sun in zones 5 through 8. The critical growing requirement is drainage. This plant will not tolerate sitting in wet soil. If you have a flat, poorly draining area, this is not your plant. But if you have a sunny, well-drained spot, a rock garden, a slope, a bed alongside a south-facing wall, a strip between pavers in full sun, woolly thyme will close up that space completely within one growing season and hold it indefinitely. Plant it in lean soil. Do not amend, do not fertilize, do not mulch around it. Lean, dry, hot conditions are where this plant expresses its best growth habit. You are not doing it a favor by improving its soil. You are making it slower and looser. Leave the soil alone and let it do what it is built to do. Number 2, green carpet rupturewort, Herniaria glabra. I want to spend some time on this one because I know for certain that the majority of people watching this video have never heard of it, and that is genuinely a shame, because rupturewort solves a specific problem that frustrates a significant percentage of American homeowners and does it more completely than almost anything else available. Here is the problem it solves. You have an area between pavers, between stepping stones, along a flagstone path, in a low-traffic walkable area where you want living ground cover, but where the space is too narrow and the foot traffic is too frequent for anything substantial to survive. You have tried moss. It died in dry weather. You have tried creeping thyme. It manages, but the gaps between pavers never fully close. You have been pulling weeds from those cracks every single spring for years. Herniaria glabra grows to approximately half an inch tall. Half an inch. It is one of the flattest ground covers in existence, and it forms a bright, bright emerald green carpet that is genuinely beautiful from a distance and genuinely tough up close. It tolerates being stepped on regularly. It tolerates heat, drought, poor soil, and neglect. And it fills in those narrow joints between pavers completely, leaving no space for weeds to root and no crack for weed seeds to fall through. The way it suppresses weeds is entirely physical. The coverage is so complete, so low, and so dense that the concept of available weed germination space simply does not apply once it is established. Hardy in zones 5 through 9. Planted in full sun to light shade. Give it well-drained soil. Space plants about 6 to 8 inches apart in spring and water them in during establishment. Within one growing season, it will close every gap, and once it is closed, your job in that area is finished. Not reduced, finished. Number 3, Mazus, Mazus reptans. This plant is obscure in the way that genuinely useful things sometimes are. Nobody with a marketing department is pushing Mazus. It does not fund a display at the nursery entrance. It does not have a television commercial. And because it does not need to be replaced every year, the garden center has very little financial motivation to walk you over to the corner where it sits and explain what it does. Here is what it does. Mazus reptans spreads via creeping surface stems that root into the soil wherever they make contact with bare ground. Once rooted, those contact points send out new stems which root again. This process continues until you have a low, dense, interlocking carpet of small, bright green leaves that physically closes every available inch of soil surface and prevents weed seeds from reaching bare soil at any point. It grows to about 2 inches tall. It handles light foot traffic without damage. And in late spring through early summer, it produces small purple and white flowers that are far more charming and noticeable than you would expect from something this ground-hugging. The flowers are disproportionately pretty for a plant this utilitarian. Mazus performs best in partial shade with reasonably consistent moisture. It will not handle prolonged drought or full summer sun without thinning out. And a thinned-out ground cover is exactly the invitation weeds are waiting for. Be honest about your conditions when you decide where to use it. In a partly shaded, moist spot along a stone path, between pavers in a partially shaded area, in a low depression that retains soil moisture, Mazus is essentially a perfect plant. Hardy in zones 5 through 8. Use it where the conditions match, and it will reward you completely. Number 4. Creeping wirevine, Muehlenbeckia axillaris. Now I want to talk to you about one of the most underused plants in the entire ground cover category, and one of the most structurally interesting from the standpoint of weed suppression. Creeping wirevine is a low-growing, spreading perennial that produces a wiry, dense tangle of very fine stems and tiny round leaves that creates a mat, unlike anything else on this list in terms of physical structure. The stems interlock with each other as they spread and root into the soil, building a woven, fabric-like layer over the soil surface. That structure, once established, is not just dense but three-dimensional, in a way that makes it extraordinarily difficult for weed seeds to penetrate. Seeds land on the mat, they sit on the mat. They cannot reach soil, they do not germinate. The mat itself grows to about 2 to 3 inches in height and spreads outward steadily year after year. It handles partial shade to full sun, tolerates drought once established, and adapts well to average to poor soils. In milder climates, it is semi-evergreen, meaning the coverage and weed suppression it provides persists through winter, rather than disappearing just when you need bare ground covered during the off-season. Hardy, in zones 7 through 10, with some cultivars showing tolerance into zone 6 with protection. If you are in the South, in California, in the Pacific Northwest, or in the Mid-Atlantic transition zone, this plant is worth serious consideration for any difficult bed where you want something architectural and weed-suppressing that most of your neighbors have never seen before. Number 5, pussy toes, Antennaria species. Here is the one for that baked, compacted, dry patch next to your front walkway, the spot where the soil is basically hardpan, where the drainage is almost non-existent in terms of water retention because the ground is so compacted that moisture just runs off, where you have put down mulch 3 times and each time the weeds came through it anyway. Most ground covers will struggle and thin out in those conditions. Thinning out is losing. A sparse, unhealthy ground cover is worse than no ground cover at all because it gives weeds a partially prepared bed to move into. Antennaria is built specifically for harsh, dry, compacted, low-nutrient conditions, and it does not just survive them, it thrives in them. It is a low-growing, mat-forming native perennial with soft, silver-gray foliage that feels like felt when you touch it. The silver color comes from fine hairs on the leaf surface, an adaptation for reflecting intense sunlight and retaining moisture in dry conditions. As a native plant, it supports specialist native bee species that depend on it specifically for pollen, which is a conservation bonus beyond the weed suppression benefit. In late spring to early July, it produces small white to pinkish flower clusters on short stems above the foliage. The flowers are delicate and cottage garden appropriate, not showy, but consistently charming. The weed suppression mechanism is primarily physical. The mat it forms is dense enough to block light from reaching the soil surface, and it roots so thoroughly into whatever soil it is given that annual weed seeds simply cannot find a bare patch to establish in. Hardy in zones 3 through 8. Full sun, dry to average soil, no amendments. This is a plant that you genuinely treat better by ignoring it. Number 6. Gold moss sedum, sedum acre. I want to talk about this one separately from the broader sedum category because it deserves its own specific mention. Sedum acre is one of the most aggressive, most vigorous, and most reliably spreading of all the low ground cover sedums, and aggressive spreading is exactly what you want from a ground cover. This plant will take whatever dry, rocky, thin, sun-baked ground you give it and fill it in completely. It is a succulent, which means it stores water in its fleshy, scale-like leaves and can survive extended drought periods that would kill most other plants outright. The mat it produces is dense, bright green, and mossy in appearance from a distance, which makes it one of the more attractive plants in this category, while also being one of the toughest. In July, it covers itself entirely in small, intense yellow flowers. The bloom period transforms that previously difficult strip along the driveway, or that rocky slope, into something that looks genuinely designed and intentional. After bloom, the foliage goes back to being a tight, clean, weed-preventing carpet. The weed suppression here works on multiple levels. The density of the mat blocks light. The dry conditions underneath the mat are inhospitable to the annual weeds that need consistent moisture to germinate, and the spreading rhizomes occupy the soil so completely that competing root systems have nowhere to establish. Hardy in zones 3 through 9. Full sun, poor drainage acceptable, no watering after establishment. If you have a hot, dry, lean spot that has beaten everything else you have tried, this is the plant. If you are still here and you have not subscribed to this channel yet, I want you to think for 1 second about what you have already learned in the last several minutes. No product recommendation, no affiliate link, no vague advice dressed up with pretty stock footage. If you have been gardening for any length of time, and you recognize that what we cover here is different from what most gardening content gives you, then hit that subscribe button right now. YouTube will put these videos in your feed every week. It costs you nothing. And the next video is going to cover something that the nursery industry has genuinely never wanted you to understand. Stay with me. Number 7. Creeping Jenny, Lysomachia nummularia. Now I want to shift to a moisture-tolerant option because most ground cover lists are heavily weighted toward drought-tolerant plants, and that leaves a significant number of homeowners without a solution. If your problem area is consistently moist, if it sits in a low spot that stays wet after rain, if it is near a downspout or a drainage area or a pond edge where the soil never fully dries out, the drought-tolerant plants on this list will rot and fail. Creeping Jenny is your specific solution for those conditions. Lysomachia nummularia is a low-spreading perennial that creeps along the soil surface and roots at every node, filling in moist areas with a carpet of round, coin-shaped leaves on trailing stems. It grows about 2 to 4 inches tall and spreads steadily and reliably in conditions that most ground covers find challenging. The golden variety, aurea, is one of the most widely available and produces lime yellow to chartreuse foliage that illuminates shady, moist areas in a way that genuinely looks like a design decision. The density of the coverage it produces is excellent, and its preference for moist, shaded conditions means it fills exactly the niche that causes so many gardeners to give up and just put down stone or bark. In summer, it produces small, cup-shaped yellow flowers that are delicate and appropriate. Weed suppression works through a combination of surface coverage and root competition in the moist soil layer, hardy in zones 3 through 9, partial shade to full shade, consistent moisture, reasonably fertile soil. Do not put this in a dry spot. But if you have a wet, shaded problem area that has been bare and weedy for years, Creeping Jenny will close it up and hold it. Number 8. Creeping Lily Turf, Liriope spicata. This is the one I promised you for that problem strip along the fence line, and I want to be precise about why this plant specifically solves that problem better than anything else. The fence line situation is typically this. You have a strip of ground running the length of your fence that is partially shaded by the fence itself, partially exposed to sun depending on orientation, subject to soil that has been compacted by foot traffic or by years of neglect. And you have tried grass there, but it does not thrive in the partial shade. And you have tried mulch, but it slides against the fence base or gets displaced by wind. What you actually need is something that spreads aggressively enough to fill the entire length of that strip. adapts to varying sun and shade conditions, tolerates compacted soil, and once established requires absolutely no input from you. That is Liriope spicata. Creeping lily turf spreads via underground runners that travel through the soil and send up new shoots continuously as they go. It does not spread above ground, which means it does not have the same tendency to creep out of its defined area that above-ground spreading plants have. Underground, it colonizes the space systematically and completely. The foliage is dense, dark green, grass-like, and arching, and it weaves together as the planting spreads to form a uniform coverage that is physically difficult for weeds to penetrate. The leaf density at and just above the soil surface blocks light completely once coverage is established. In late summer, it produces purple flower spikes above the foliage that attract pollinators. It is deer-resistant and handles everything from full sun to heavy shade, from dry to moderately moist soil with equal competence. Hardy in zones 5 through 10. Space plants about 12 inches apart in that fence line strip. Water them in for the first season, and within 2 growing seasons, the entire length will be closed. After that, your relationship with that strip is finished. Number 9, ice plant, Delosperma species. I want to talk to you about a plant that most gardeners in the northern half of the country have completely overlooked because they assumed it was only viable in warm climates. The introduction of cold, hardy Delosperma cultivars over the last 2 decades has extended the range of these plants significantly, and if you are gardening in zones 5 through 9, they deserve serious consideration for your hottest, driest, most difficult problem areas. Ice plant is a succulent ground cover that forms low, spreading mats of fleshy, water-storing foliage and produces one of the most intense and prolonged flower displays of any ground cover that exists. When Delosperma is in bloom from late spring through most of summer, the flowers cover the foliage so completely that you cannot see the leaves beneath them. We are talking vivid magenta, hot pink, yellow, orange, or white blooms in such concentration that the planting looks like a solid sheet of color. Then the flowers finish. The foliage remains as a tight, succulent, weed-suppressing mat, and the plant continues holding that difficult ground through the entire off-season. The weed suppression mechanism is the same as sedum. The mat is dense. The conditions underneath it are dry and hot. Annual weeds that depend on consistent moisture simply cannot establish in the root zone of an established ice plant planting. Cooper's ice plant, Delosperma cooperi, is the most widely available and produces vivid magenta flowers with a white center that is outstanding. Fire Spinner is a newer cultivar with orange, pink, and white tricolor blooms that won the Perennial Plant of the Year designation and is available at most quality nurseries now. Full sun, excellent drainage, lean to average soil. Do not plant it in heavy clay or in low spots that hold water. In the right conditions, it is permanent, self-maintaining, and frankly beautiful. Number 10. Blue Star Creeper, Prasia pedunculata. Here is a delicate-looking plant that is significantly tougher than it appears. Blue Star Creeper forms a low, soft carpet of tiny leaves with small, star-shaped pale blue flowers that bloom almost continuously, from late spring through early summer, and intermittently through the rest of the season depending on conditions. It looks like the kind of plant that needs constant care. It does not. The way Blue Star Creeper suppresses weeds is straightforward physical competition. The stems spread along the soil surface and root at every node, creating a continuous living mat that covers bare soil completely and leaves no available germination space for weed seeds. The foliage sits close enough to the ground that even the smallest annual weeds cannot get sufficient light beneath the canopy to establish. It handles light to moderate foot traffic, which makes it genuinely viable between stepping stones, along a low-traffic path, or as a lawn substitute in a small, defined area where you want the softness and texture of living ground cover without the maintenance of grass. It thrives in partial shade with consistent moisture. Full sun in hot climates will stress it unless moisture is reliable. Hardy in zones 5 through 9, though some sources extend that to zone 4, with reliable snow cover for root protection. Space plants about 6 inches apart and give them 1 season of establishment watering. After that, the coverage closes and the maintenance requirement essentially disappears. Number 11. Bishop's weed, Agopodium podagraria variegatum. I want to end with this one, and I want to be completely direct with you about something before I tell you why it works so well. Because honesty about this plant is more important than a clean sales pitch. Bishop's weed is extraordinarily effective as a weed-suppressing ground cover in difficult shaded areas. It spreads via underground rhizomes with genuine vigor. It tolerates deep shade under mature trees, dry soil, poor soil, root competition, and almost any difficult combination of conditions you can give it. The variegated form, with its green and white foliage, is genuinely attractive and brightens dark shaded areas dramatically. In those conditions it is, in terms of pure function, one of the best performing ground covers that exists. The honest caveat is this: the same vigor that makes it excellent at covering difficult ground makes it difficult to contain if it is given unrestricted access to adjacent beds or lawn. Do not use it in a situation where it can spread beyond defined hard edges. Use it inside beds with clear physical boundaries, inside raised structures, in isolated areas completely separated from adjacent plantings. If you respect those limits at the planning stage, and you are giving it a defined, contained area in deep, dry shade under trees where you need reliable coverage, and you are tired of mulching a spot where nothing else grows, Bishop's weed will cover that ground completely, hold it against weeds indefinitely, and ask almost nothing from you in return. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, full shade to partial shade, average to dry soil, 0 fertilizer, 0 supplemental water after establishment, 0 maintenance once it is contained. That is the trade you are making with this plant. Choose wisely, use it correctly, and it is one of the most effective tools in this category. Additional knowledge section. The single most important thing you do before any ground cover goes in the ground. I want you to understand something clearly before you order a single flat of anything on this list. The plant is not the variable that determines whether this works. The site preparation is the variable. I have watched homeowners spend money on excellent ground cover plants and lose an entire growing season because they planted into an area that already had established perennial weeds in the soil. It does not matter how vigorous the ground cover is. It does not matter how good the label looks at the nursery. If you put a new planting into an area that has creeping charlie, bindweed, quackgrass, Canada thistle, or any other established perennial weed already rooted in the soil, those weeds have a root system that is months ahead of your new plants. During the establishment period, when your new plants are their most vulnerable and need every available resource going toward root development, those existing weeds will be competing for every drop of moisture and every available nutrient. Your new plants will struggle. The weeds will win. You will blame the plant. The plant is not the problem. The preparation was the problem. The most effective non-chemical approach for a badly infested area is solarization. Mow or cut the existing vegetation as low as possible. Water the soil thoroughly. Lay clear plastic sheeting over the entire area and weigh down every edge. Leave it in place for 4 to 6 weeks during the hottest part of summer. The temperature under that plastic builds to levels that kill weed seeds, established weed roots, and soil pathogens to a meaningful depth. When you pull that plastic up, you have a cleared, relatively clean seed bed that gives your new plants an actual fighting chance. If your timeline does not allow for solarization, sheet mulching is the next best option. Lay overlapping sections of plain brown cardboard directly on the soil over the weed area. Wet the cardboard thoroughly. Cover it with 3 to 4 inches of wood chip mulch. You can plant through this system by cutting an X into the cardboard, folding back the flaps, planting your ground cover, and folding the cardboard back around the base of the plant. The cardboard smothers what is underneath it, while your new plants establish from above. It breaks down within one growing season and adds organic matter to the soil as it does. The third option for areas with deep-rooted perennial weeds is manual excavation followed by patience. Dig out as much of the root system as you can access. Then wait 2 to 3 weeks and watch for regrowth from roots you missed. Remove that regrowth before it has time to photosynthesize and recharge the remaining root reserves. Repeat once more if needed. Then plant. The goal in every case is the same. Give your ground covers clean, uncontested soil to establish in. Do that correctly, and the plants on this list will do everything I told you they would do. Skip it, and you will be fighting the same battle you are already fighting, just with more plants involved. Prepare the site. Plant the right plant for your conditions. Walk away. That is the system. That is how you stop buying mulch every spring. That is how you stop spending your weekends on your knees in your own yard. Your yard should be working for you. If it is not, everything we covered today is where you start. Drop your hardiness zone in the comments right now. Tell me which plant on this list you are putting in the ground first, or tell me which problem area you have been fighting for years, and let me give you a specific recommendation. That back and forth in the comments is genuinely one of the most useful things that happens on this channel, because when one person asks a question about their conditions, 10 other people with the same conditions get an answer they did not even know to ask for. And if someone in your life is still loading bags of mulch into their car every April, still buying the same herbicides, still starting from scratch every single spring, send this video to that person. Not because it is good content, because it is the information that ends that cycle for them. Subscribe if you are not already. I will see you in the next one.